Can you feel it? From the north it comes. The tendrils of chaos spread south, tainting the lands. And with it, the warriors of chaos march. We must ready ourselves, for war is coming. But who has brought the warring tribes together? What manner of champion holds that power? Oblivion has come, my lord. Archaon, the ever-chosen lord of the end times, has re-entered the world. With him marches a chaos host numberless in size. Prepare yourself for the coming apocalypse.
For weeks, the war raged on between the orcs and the dwarves, with no one gaining any ground. At last, time had come, and the armies of chaos had arrived. They landed on the shores near Granti Mengol, controlled by Zufbar. After taking it, they relentlessly moved on to the newly conquered Ekrond, then the Dragonhorn Mines, and Stone Mine Tower. Lord Thorogrim looked over the map of his territories. The situation looked grim. He sent a new commander, Scalf Finson, to try to halt the tide that was washing ashore. The dwarves formed into strong formations and marched forward to meet their enemy. Mounted Chaos Warriors tried to ride around to flank them, and Finson turned some forces to meet them. Some of their scouts got trapped by the chaos and chewed up by them. Despite the horrible sight, the dwarves held their ground and only fired into the melee. All along the line, the dwarves built an impenetrable fortress of fierce warriors. Soon, reinforcements arrived, and dwarves surrounded the invaders, giving them a decisive victory. In the north, the armies of the undead were stirring, threatening to move up the mountain and attack the dwarves, so armies under Bera's Keeper and Ungrim Ironfist had to move to contain them. Unwilling to be contained, Manfred von Karstein led his forces into the mountains to challenge them. The dwarves set up a line to hold the forces of evil at bay, refusing to move even as fireballs were thrown at them. These units drew in the undead armies. Then Bera's Keeper led a flanking force around their side, attacking the interior lines of the undead and trapping them. It was a victory for the dwarves, and they flung the undead back down the mountain into the swamps where they belonged. They followed up their victory into the lowlands, attacking the undead and allying with the human empire.
Once more, we will ally with the manlings, just as Grimnir did 10 score centuries ago. It has been many years since the Umgi have produced an emperor as worthy as Magnus or their founding warrior king. But I hear good things about this Franz. Now is the time to test his mettle. We will stand with him against the Groby at Blackfire Pass, as King Kurgan did long ago. If the men of the Empire fight with bravery and honor, then the runes of my crown will glow with pride ever after. A gesture of my will, just as this Emperor awaits to take up his Warhammer. A gift from the Dwarfs, no less. So, gird your loins, my kin. May your eyes be sharp and thirsty for Urk blood, for they come. We will repulse these vile creatures with our dying breath and renew the oldest and greatest alliance this world has ever seen.
They placed their armies in sight of the enemy and secretly set up some miners in the woods close to their lines. The forces of the dead charged down the hill at them, and the dwarves held their ground, shooting them down with cannons. When their lines connected, the dwarves had at them, and the helicopters flew past at their interior lines. Their hidden units also came out of the woods and rushed at the rear guard. Soon the dwarves overwhelmed them and took to the field. Emboldened by their victories and their new alliance with the human empire, the dwarves moved northward along the mountains. Ungrim Ironfist, lord of the Troll Slayers, rushed down the mountain into the armies of the undead, scattering them. But ominous reports were coming from their new allies. The armies of chaos were attacking the Empire, continuing a relentless push. In the south, their old problems grew worse. The orcs were getting more organized, no doubt inspired by the leaders of chaos. The dwarves pushed into overdrive, conquering as many small enemy armies as they could to clear them away. And then another problem arose they did not expect. The border princes were attacking a fellow dwarven kingdom. It was not one that Thorgrim had allied with, but his goal was to unite the clans, and so he joined in the fight against the princes. He sent Taker to take the city of Eckendorf, which they did swiftly. This angered their allies in the Empire, but they had their own problems with the armies of chaos, so Thorgrim did not concern himself with it. He continued his assault, taking Matorka. As he moved on to Zvorka, the orcs, in an unusual moment of being helpful to the dwarves, attacked Myrmidons. 2 dwarf armies reached Zvordek and laid siege to it. Meanwhile, further north, the undead attacked up the mountain again, where Iron Fist was defending. They set up in a condensed formation with minor skirmishing in the lead. This skirmish block broke up the undead formations, and the dwarves attacked the remaining lines. The undead countered with cavalry, smashing into the dwarf lines wherever they could find a hole. They managed to get behind the dwarf lines and hit them from every angle, defeating Iron Fist and getting a foothold on the mountain. Thorgrim counterattacked further north, and as he did, the siege of Zvorak launched into an all-out assault. They moved forward their wall climbers and strafed the walls with their helicopters. Their archers moved forward and threw bolts at the walls while the rest of the lines hurried forward with ladders. The siege engines hit the wall, and the dwarves poured out, assaulting the lines, and then rushing into the city. It became a race to see who could get there first. At last they made it, taking the city. The victory was sweet, but the border prince's own siege of Karakim was stubbornly continuing, and could lead to the fall of the city despite everything else. The dwarves continued their attack on the border princes by attacking Myrmidon. Their thinking was that if they took all the border princes' cities, they would have to break their siege on the dwarven city, so they also took Luxini. Meanwhile, the undead continued to try to push up the mountain, and Thorgrim continued his advance into their territories. He set up his main force behind some woods, and some miners in woods to the flank of the enemy. The undead caught the scent of the hidden miners and swarmed them, then moved on the main line. Thorgrim pounced on them in the woods with everything he had, and he overwhelmed them, winning the battle. The undead countered by assaulting a city at the foot of the mountains, and winning. Chaos warriors followed behind them, scattering the dwarves and the undead alike. An undead army under Heinrich Kilmler moved on Iron Fist's army in the lowlands. Iron Fist moved at the enemy, but they moved at different speeds, hitting the enemy at different times, and they were defeated piecemeal. Recognizing the undead as the bigger threat, Thorgrim brought Dragonslayer north with a small, rebuilt army he had gathered of troops who had survived with him. As the undead were beginning to move up the mountain, Dragonslayer moved up with Birnoth the Bloody, and they took Schwarzwaffen. Then they laid siege to Castle Drakenhof. Further north, the dwarves had settled along the entire spine of the mountain, led by General Joigman, who then invaded and took Fort Jakova. With these threats, King Thorgrim sent a peace treaty to Manfred von Karstein, Lord of the Undead. Karstein, who was still fighting the armies of Chaos, agreed, and both sides pulled back their forces. The Undead and the Empire, in a strange show of support for one another, defeated the forces of Chaos before they ever reached the dwarves. With this distraction, the dwarves were able to show the border princes that they had no hope against the dwarves, and they ceased their siege, eventually dissolving into the forces of the Empire. Thus, the dwarves had succeeded at uniting the dwarven clans, and had secured their borders. They had not conquered all the territory they had hoped, but they controlled the mountains, which was what they had hoped for. And so the dwarven kingdom thrived, and lived happily ever after, if such a thing can exist in the world of Warhammer.